Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Keren Yarhi-Milo. I'm the Dean of the School of International Public Affairs and the Althea Stevens Professor of International Relations. Today, we are discussing the state of childcare in New York City, and I am very grateful to Ester Fuchs and the Urban and Social Policy Concentrations and Council Member Julie Menin, a former SIPA adjunct professor, for bringing this event concept to us. And I'm proud that we're recently doing this in the recently launched Institute of Global Politics Women's Initiative that is co-sponsoring the event. When we launched the Institute of Global Politics, we from the beginning said that we're going to focus on issues from the local to the global. And I think in the last 6 months, you've seen programming that really span the local and to the global. And again, and the Women's Initiative within IGP that we launched last month is really very, very relevant in what we're doing here today and the topic of today's conversations. As one of the 4 pillars of the IGP's Women's Initiative is women's economic opportunities. But we all know that access to affordable, high-quality childcare and improving the wages of care of workers who are predominantly women of color is really critical. It's really critical to women's and families' economic security. And I am thrilled that one of our first events on the care economy is focused on our home, New York City. Our own Community Speak survey, for which Ester is the principal investigator, recently found in the fall of 2023, that the issue impacts families with young children across the entire city is the issue of childcare. Now listen to these statistics. Nearly 1 in 3 families who need childcare have difficulty affording it. And 1 in 4, which is about 24%, have difficulty accessing childcare. The problem is especially acute in the Bronx, where 38% of families face difficulty affording childcare, and 33% of families struggle with accessing childcare when they needed it. Despite these statistics, the New York City Council has demonstrated leadership and commitment to advancing accessible and affordable childcare, and we are absolutely delighted to have leaders from the City Council at SIPA today to discuss the current state of daycare and after school in New York City in particular, and some of what we'll be talking about will have broader implications in New York City, of course. But before we begin our panel discussions today, I am pleased and honored to introduce someone who has spent her career, honestly, fighting for children and families. My colleagues, my friend, my partner, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. She's also the chair of the IGP faculty board and a member of our faculty. She's a professor of international public affairs here at SIPA. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Keren, and really thanks to all of you, particularly the members of the City Council who are here with us today. It makes an enormous amount of difference for the work we're doing here to make sure, as Keren said, that it is local to global. And there are so many challenges to raising a family in any part of our country, but we're focusing today on New York City. And it's not an accident we're focusing on this when we have a city council that is majority women. And a lot of young women and women with children and women with new babies and women looking for childcare themselves. And what I hope is that we can not only hear from all the city council members in two great panels moderated by two SEPA faculty members, Ester Fuchs and Jerry Powell, but we can help you with ideas for solutions, because there's got to be some creative thinking around how to manage this incredible challenge. And today's program demonstrates the urgency and the importance of this issue. Just last week, President Biden designated April as Care Workers Recognition Month, and today he's holding an event about child care in Washington, D.C. It's called Care Can't Wait. It's a rally. And I think we've got to recognize that this is a problem that affects everybody to a greater or lesser extent, but it also affects our economy. And you'll hear from our city council representatives, what they're doing to try to deal with it. As somebody who has worked on this issue for a very long time, actually starting way back in the early 80s with a program that came out of New York City that was started by a woman named Ellie Guggenheimer, who, you remember Ellie? Some of you might remember Ellie Guggenheimer. She was, yes you do, Gale, because she was a relentless advocate for childcare, and she started in New York, but she took her campaign literally across the country. We've made some progress, but let's be honest, nowhere near enough. And we're seeing here in New York the possibility that what was promised as universal pre-K is being cut back. And I know the City Council will be, not just talking about that today, but fighting to keep that. So we're going to, at the Women's Initiative at the IGP here at SEPA, lots of alphabets, to really stay focused on this. And Stacey Abrams, who's an IGP Distinguished Fellow with us, made the point that we have to think about child care holistically. We have to think about the families, we have to think about the children, we have to think about the workers, and we have to think about employers who need to be able to have people, come to work and not be ripped apart because of child care problems. This is an issue for every parent, but let me just say, I think, without fear of too much contradiction, it's particularly an issue for mothers. And the kind of guilt that you feel as you go back to work, go off to work, pursue your education, whatever it might be, and not feeling that you've got the best care or the most secure care or can't afford the care. So these are the issues we're going to be talking about today, and I really want to thank the City Council for bringing it to the forefront. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Columbia SEPA Professor and Director of the Urban and Social Policy Program, Ester Fuchs.
Well, thanks everybody for coming today. This is very exciting to be hosting this event at SEPA. First of all, following the Secretary, wow, I just need to. We know that she's been a leader in absolutely everything globally, but she's also been a leader on this issue. One of my heroes. Thank you, really. And my dean, I need to thank her too, because we're having this event at SEPA because of her. She's really expanded the scope of the work that we're doing to encompass in a very serious way the work of New York City, the work of urban, the work of global, and the work of local. And I can't thank you enough for that. So we'll get down to business here, ladies. And I got the all-ladies panel, so I'm lucky today. daycare, as part of the care economy and as part of child care, is something, as we heard and that we all know, is critical for families to be healthy, for families to thrive, and for all of our city's economy to work. And all of you have been working so effectively in this space. And I want to say the City Council has been leading in this area. And I believe the council doesn't get enough credit for the work it does. And part of the reason to showcase this today is to help provide the voice and also give you an opportunity to tell us about your work. I'm going to start with my former student, as that, who, that was really good of me to recognize the fact that how old I am, right? And how young you are. Council Member Julie Menin from Manhattan. She's really the inspiration behind this event. And she's a Columbia alum and also taught here at SEPA. So, Council Member Menin, in November 2022, the City Council signed a very important child care legislative package, 5 bills that you co-sponsored with a number of people on this panel today, into law. Okay, I hope everybody knows that sponsoring bills into law doesn't really get you to the end of the process, right? And if you didn't learn that in SEPA, you better learn it today, and you'll learn it from my colleagues here. Can you tell us more about these laws and how they are being implemented or not being implemented, and how we can improve affordability and access to child care, especially daycare, in relationship to the laws that you've passed?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Esther, I want to thank you. I want to thank Secretary Clinton and the Dean. It is an honor to be here. I taught at SEPA, and now to come back here along with my fantastic colleagues is really just, words don't describe how much it means personally to me, and to see all the students who are out here. So childcare has been a top priority for the City Council. About a year ago, the Council passed a package of legislation that I sponsored along with my colleagues. And what those bills do is first, the first bill creates an advisory board that will get us to universal childcare within 5 years. We're 1 year into that. It pushes New York City farther than any other city in terms of providing accessible, affordable childcare. We know that childcare on average costs between $18,000 and $21,000 a year. That is simply unaffordable for the vast majority of New Yorkers. And at the same time, we also know that many childcare facilities have closed. We've gone from 11,000 childcare facilities a couple years ago to a little over 9,000 today. And so we have 17 childcare deserts all around New York City. The other bills that were part of the package that we passed and that the mayor signed into law, one of them gives tax abatements to property owners to create childcare facilities. I'm proud to say that 1,900 new seats have been created since that bill went into effect. So we are indeed building more childcare seats, but with that said, we have enormous problems, in large part due to large payment issues that the Department of Education, I know our education chair will definitely talk about that. The other bills in the package, one of them provides grants to struggling childcare providers. Another bill creates a subsidy portal so that parents and caregivers can access subsidies. And then the fifth bill in the package lists every single childcare provider in the city. It lists information such as the language that is spoken, is the facility in someone's home or a freestanding facility. So in total, this package really pushes New York City farther than any other city in terms of childcare, but we still have a long ways to go.
Oh, thank you, Julie. I think it's a good place to pick up on some of what you said. The data is so compelling and so powerful, and really we've lost ground during COVID, and that's part of the reason this is so difficult right now. Council member Jennifer Gutiérrez from Brooklyn. Brooklyn's in the house, anybody? Woo! Okay. Tell us more about your bill. UCC in New York City, which requires the city to establish free, high-quality I love that we're mentioning high-quality childcare.
Yes, yes.
Not just free, because that's just really not enough, for all children from 6 weeks to 5 years old, regardless of immigration status.
Thank you. And thank you for having me, for inviting me, to my colleague, Julie Menin, who is really excited about this, to include us all. And of course, for this wonderful audience, thank you both. So the Universal Child Care Bill for me is really personal. I was pregnant during the general. I had had my baby 2 or 3 weeks after I got elected. And I, for some reason, had not thought who was going to raise this baby while I was at work. Like, I just, it's like, why don't, the village will come, surely the village will come and help. And I was very lucky in that my schedule, being a council member, we create our schedules, right? With the huge support from my staff, I was able to do all the things as a new mom: breastfeed, pump, go to a meeting, come back so I can do all those things. And then it wasn't really until I started looking for childcare myself. My mom at the time had gotten diagnosed with cancer. And so all the things were happening. And these are all the things that happen to people. These are all real life things. And I was on a waiting list for a while. And I finally found a place, which I love, which my daughter is still in. She's 2 years old. And so that we had these opportunity to reintro these bills. And I'll just give you a little bit of context. The bill in the last administration, it was one sentence, which was create a plan for childcare. And I said, I think we can do more. I think we can expand on this. Councilmember Menin had her strong package of bills, which we were all on. For me, some of the folks that supported me in my campaign were primarily daycare providers. They were the women of Nuestros Niños in the south side of Williamsburg in my district. And I had been alongside them for many fights to save their center, for salary increases. So in conversation with them, along with the Daycare Council, along with so many advocates, I know we have New Yorkers United for Childcare here today as well, we put together this bill which incorporated what we thought was a lot of the holes missing in the childcare system. The system is broken. That's not brand new information. So it was about creating opportunity for all New Yorkers, regardless of immigration status. It was a very clear timeline of 0 to 5. Going through the child care research process myself, I came across a lot of centers that were not near where I lived, could take my child when she was 2 years old. I was like, well, this doesn't work. So it was really important to emphasize the age. It was also really important to emphasize opportunities. So for home-based childcare providers, which for in a lot of our districts is the childcare. We don't have a lot of city-owned spaces that are traditional daycare centers. It's literally women as business entrepreneurs who care about children, who care about communities starting this business. So the bill creates a plan, or calls for the creation of a plan, so to make that process more seamless. If you are someone who cares about early childhood education and you want to start a business, that process should be a lot easier. There shouldn't be so many barriers. And then the last piece was the providers. Shout out to the providers, majority Black and brown women, that's right. It was about really calling attention to pay parity, and that's not easy. I, of course, do not want to say the bill will do it. You touched on it. It takes a lot more work after a bill gets passed, but it's about raising the entire industry of women who've been doing this work, many of who have not gotten increases in close to decades. I met with a provider last week who's been a provider at a location for 10 years and then also does deliveries after work. And she will not leave this profession because she cares so much about it, but she really wishes she didn't need a second job so that she can support it. So the bill really is aiming to create a plan for childcare alongside so many of the bills that Councilmember Menin passed, and also raising the necessity for pay parity for these providers and creating more opportunities for them.
Thank you. I think you touched on so many important things, and it feeds right into my next question for Councilmember Pierina Sanchez from the Bronx. The Bronx is in the house. Okay.
All right.
This is something that a lot of the students here will appreciate. Councilmember Sanchez sponsoring legislation with State Senator Gustavo Rivera. It doesn't just happen at the local level. We need support from the state. We need support from the federal government, as the secretary has been working on for many years. But this is really important for New York, as I hope everybody in the room understands. You both introduced a series of bills, and both in the legislature at the state level and in the city council to protect children from opioid exposure in child care facilities. Tell us more about this.
So thank you. I also want to join in thanking Councilmember Menin. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Secretary. This is fangirl. so awesome to be in this space with you all. So yeah, I'm Pierina Ana Sanchez. I gotta say that this package of legislation really comes from a painful place. On September 15th of last year, you might have seen the news that there was a child who died of opioid overdose at his daycare center. He had been there for not a week. He started on Monday. Friday was the date of exposure. And his mother, Zoila, who is now a close friend, had made the choice that she was finally going to go back into the workforce. And she was, she made the choice to find a daycare facility. And she lost her child that day, that very same day. And it's such a painful event that happened. It rocked the nation. I think there was no shortage of media knocking on their door. By the way, can we talk about the sensitivity of the media in these situations? It was really, really horrible. There was no shortage of outlets and coverage of this tragic event. And coming away from this and trying to wrap our minds around how could this possibly happen, I've certainly reflected on a couple of angles, on a couple of the contributing factors that led to this, right? One, the availability of high quality childcare. Zoila had been looking for, she said, since the baby was born. The baby was 21 months. The fact that she had been searching and she wasn't sure where she was going to leave her child, who these folks were, but she decided to take a leap of faith. Second of all, real talk. The Bronx, right? My section, our neighborhood in the Bronx, we're a low-income district. Our median worker earns just $23,000 per year. Our average family is housing cost burdened, facing so many challenges in the district. And some of our youth turn to opportunities in the illicit market. Narco trafficking is a reality in our district. You see it in the corners, you see it all around. And for that to pervade and go into a center just kind of brings everything together, right? All of the contours of what it means to be from a low-income community, to live with the resilience that you have as an individual. This is an immigrant family, hardworking. Dad works 2 jobs. Mom was ready to jump in the workforce. They have 5 kids. They were living in a 1-bedroom apartment. The resilience of this family is incredible. And they were turning to a chance of opportunity so that they can lift their family even further. And so all of these factors come together, and I know that I've had many conversations with all of our council colleagues, especially the new moms, especially the moms on the council, about what can we do? The Speaker's office, what can we do? And we talked about everything from how do you keep a child care facility safe? What are the protocols for inspection? What are they looking for? What are they not looking for? What is the training of daycare providers? It was actually the care provider. It was the owner of the daycare who called 911. She did not have the training to save that life. She is in prison for very good reason, but she would have if she would have even known. So all of these things came together to lead to the reality that, we have certain powers at the city, we have certain powers at the state, and we have certain powers at the federal government. And that's what led me to partner with Senator Gustavo Rivera. Because if you want to impose new requirements on child care facilities, you have to work through the state. Many are licensed through the state, and many of these regulations come through the state. And so this child care package, this package of legislation really focuses on the training that daycare providers have, right? We know that so many home cares are run by mostly women of color, especially in communities like mine, who really, really care. So let's make sure that they have the access to training and education that they need to save a life if that situation should ever come before them. But in addition to that, what are inspectors looking for? What did these inspectors miss? I mean, look, it would have been really hard to know that there was opioid, there was fentanyl beneath the floorboards. That would have been very difficult for anyone to know. But then you go into the neighborhood, and then you have conversations after the fact. And people in that building, neighbors in that building, they said there were strange things happening in that apartment, that there were people coming in and out at night. This was a daycare apartment, right? There was not supposed to be used outside of business hours. And so what are our inspectors looking at? And so that's really what the partnership with the senator is focusing on, is making sure that the inspectors have everything that they look for. Let's translate our policy powers into street smarts, okay? I mean, it's sad to have to say it, but sometimes you have to legislate and you have to create policies for the eventuality to try to keep a child safe.
Thank you, and it's so important what you just said. It's never obvious, and we can improve the regulatory structure, and such a powerful story. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you for doing that work. Now I get to ask a question to Councilmember Rita Joseph. I just learned something interesting about Councilmember Joseph from Brooklyn. She is a dear friend of our Mayor Dinkins, who was at SEPA for over 20 years, and we will be doing the Dinkins Forum later this month with Hakeem Jeffries, our minority leader in Congress. So I was really delighted to learn that, because everybody who knew Mayor Dinkins knew that the most important thing to him was children. Yep. And that gives me an opportunity to call out my dear friend, Gretchen Buchenholz, who runs Association to Benefit Children, and Jennifer March, who runs the Citizen Committee for Children, and Nancy Colbrin, who retired from this land but is still here fighting this wonderful, important fight. Just three matriarchs of this movement, and I think it's so important that you hear the new members of the council, young people, you're all young relative to me anyway, doing this work and getting it better. So Councilmember Joseph, you are one of those people doing this work and getting it better as chair of the council's Committee on Education. And you were a teacher yourself, and I think that's actually very important when we talk about the quality issues. You actually know what quality looks like, because this is not just, the daycare setting is just not keeping kids sitting there doing nothing. The education component of early childhood, we know from research, impacts kids' prospects for the rest of their lives. So one of the main issues affecting childcare are the workers, who are predominantly women of color and low paid, as we've learned. So how is the council working to improve wages and the economic security for care workers?
First of all, good morning for having me here. Good morning, everyone. Secretary, good morning. Councilmember Menin and my colleagues. One of the things the council is doing steadfast is working on pay parity. Because when we look, almost 1/3 of these women live in poverty. But yet, as Councilmember Menin mentioned, none of them will quit this job because it's coming from a place of love, because they want to give back. So the community, we are working steadfast in this budget to make sure that we're getting pay parity. I believe there's even a lawsuit to make sure that these women are getting paid what they deserve. Also pay parity for preschool special education students that are currently left out of this process as well. In the last budget, we were able to get the 4410. But this time, again, it's on the table. We need to baseline it, because we're currently having about 600 students sitting at home with no preschool childcare. So that's a huge deficit on our side. We must continue to fight to make sure that we provide pay parity for these women. We know they're all women of color, and half of them are living in poverty. And at one point, we faced challenges, and the Daycare Council can tell us, they were not getting paid until I held 2 hearings. When I came into office, providers were calling. They're like, Councilmember, we haven't been paid in 2 years. No medical insurance. My mortgage is not paid. I'm the sole provider in some cases. And this is unacceptable. So because this field is led by women, now that we have a 31 women council, we're going to make sure that we fight that these women get this equitable pay. It's unacceptable, because we know early childhood is the foundation for everything else, right? So if we have a strong foundation, we know the top will be strong. So early childhood is a must, and it's a must for women, working women. And we know when women don't work, we contribute to the economy so much. And even in the last statistics we saw, and I thought we discussed that early, in 2022, the city lost $23 billion because women had to make a choice. Should I work, or should I take less of a pay or less hours to make sure my child is getting quality childcare? And as you mentioned, across the board, one of the things we're working is to make sure that all providers are also getting the professional development they need and a curriculum that's across the city, no matter where you go into, whatever zip code you go into, the providers are all providing the same high quality instruction to our New York City children.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask everybody, I'm so excited about this panel. So I know I'm going off script, so forgive me. Everybody here who knows me knows that I do that anyway. I can't. But I'm just making us all optimistic about the ability to make these changes, to having you all in the city council and holding the mayor's feet to the fire on this issue.
Oh, yes.
We're here to help you do that. So I'm going to ask you just one more question that everybody can address. Because we are in a global institution here, SIPA is the School of International and Public Affairs, and we know the world looks to New York as leaders and takes away things from our city, but we also look all over the world for different models of things, and I'm wondering if any of you have thought about other places which do this better than we do, and that there are things we can borrow from them and use in our system that might help. So I'll ask you to just do a rapid fire on that. I'll start with you, Julie.
Sure. So before we introduced the package on childcare over a year ago, our team looked at, first of all, in the United States, what were other cities doing? Because I'm a big believer we don't always need to reinvent the wheel. Like paid sick leave, for example, which we implemented in New York City, other cities were doing it, Portland, Seattle, and other cities. So it's really important to look at, are there lessons learned? I'm happy to say, actually, we pushed it farther in New York City than any other city. So we looked at San Francisco, we looked at Chicago, we looked at Atlanta. A number of these cities had set up offices of childcare, but what they really weren't doing is doing a model of universal childcare, which is what we wanted to do here in New York City. We wanted to expand the coverage so it's not only for families that are 300% to 400% under the poverty line. So we were able to push the envelope here in New York much farther than any other city has done. We also looked at what other states were doing. So Massachusetts, for example, has done a lot on childcare. They've created 7,100 new childcare seats since the pandemic. When federal funds ran out, the state ended up subsidizing it. Here in New York, Governor Hochul has allocated $7 billion. That's great, but we all know we need a lot more if we're really going to get to universal childcare.
Thanks, Councilmember Gutierrez.
Can you repeat the question?
Just if there are other places, not even necessarily in the United States, but around the globe, that we can learn from.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Even for our bill, we looked similarly a lot of states here in New York, other cities, but we also looked abroad. We looked, I think it was Montreal. We looked at a city in, I think, Norway or Finland, excuse me. But I will say that it really amped me up because the general response was like, why aren't you doing this already? What do you mean? Would women have to go back to work after 6 weeks? What is this? And so it was a learning experience in that it was all the technicalities of understanding logistically how to put forward a universal child care plan, but it is also political will. People, we have not gotten to universal child care because it impacts primarily women. And in general, people don't care about women. We don't care about things that impact women. And so it's taken such a long time. And so it really is, it's like the moment, which I think is now the national conversations around child care are really exciting, are really encouraging here in the city as well. But I noticed that it was just that piece where it's like, just do it. Just do it and don't ask for forgiveness because K through 12 was radical. And now it's the minimum, and so we really need to approach childcare in the same way. So we had looked at a number of cities, and it was similar to what Councilmember Menin said. But abroad, I think was my greatest takeaway, which was like, why are you guys taking so long? Right. Which was really helpful in gathering the enthusiasm to intro this bill.
Councilmember Sanchez?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think I think this is true for both of us. We're both new mommies. We got a little bit lucky because at the beginning of our terms, you gave birth, you said in November, right before taking office. I gave birth in August of 2022. And we were still sort of in this hybrid world where I think I chaired a hearing with my baby was maybe like 6 weeks old or something like that. I remember the baby was born on August 1st. August 2nd, we were in the middle of redistricting, and I took a Zoom from the hospital bed. I was like, let me put on some makeup here to talk about the importance of these lines. Please go out and testify, community. But I raise that to say that, you know, we're in such privileged positions as council members. We're in such privileged positions as professionals. But you know, looking internationally, it's the standard for other places, as Jen just said, to have childcare. So in Denmark, your child is 2 years old, although it happens 0 to 2, question mark send. But if your child is 2 years old, you have options. You can send your child to a center-based care. You can have a nanny. You can decide to stay home part of the time, and the country will subsidize whatever choice you make. Whatever choice you make, there doesn't have to be a decision, you know, it doesn't have to be like, well, I have to do this because it's the only way that I'll get the government to support. And just internationally, we're talking about the US spends $200 on average on early child care education for a child, $200 per year. We're talking about tens of thousands in other countries, $14,000 in some Scandinavian nations, you know, $12,000 per year in European nations. We are just completely behind the curve in supporting mothers, and I will, you know, venture into being the controversial one. But you know, the data really shows it. It is women who are hurting the most. But nationally, it's a $122 billion impact, a $2 billion impact right here in New York City for moms that are choosing to stay home and for parents that are choosing to stay home.
Councilmember Joseph, you get the last word on this.
Oh, thank you. So the model that I looked at was the Japanese model, where every new development has an early childhood center at the bottom. So in my district, I'm building my first development, and that was one of the things I negotiated. Because why? It's the pipeline. There's a middle school right around the corner. There's a elementary and a middle school right around the corner. So there's new development. And when I looked at the area as well, we talked about nutrition. When it comes to young children, there was a food desert. So negotiating with the developer, we're going to have a supermarket at the bottom and an early childhood center. And the elementary and middle school is right around the corner. So that was important for me as a forever educator. I'm always thinking, so now that should be standard as we continue to build throughout the city, that now developments are thinking about early childhood centers right in the building where they could come in.
Yeah.
This has been amazing. I know I could go on for much longer, but we have a second panel on after school, the bookends of childcare, essentially for moms and for kids. You are all amazing. God, we need optimism, but we also need pragmatism, and we need hard work. You all show us how to move forward. You all show us of the value of serving in government, and that government can get the work done. We're with you. We're going to be continuing to help you here at SEPA, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage attorney, advocate, and Columbia SEPA adjunct professor, Jerry Powell.
Right next to you. Good morning.
You know, I want to, before we dive into this panel,
The mic is on. Your mic's not on. Your mic's not on.
I don't know if I'm, can you hear me now?
We can hear you better. Is your microphone?
Good morning.
Okay.
I have to talk into it. Okay, that's better. I hear it now. No, I think it's okay there. We're good? Yeah. Okay, good morning. I wanted to just pause for a second and highlight something that Councilmember Joseph mentioned, but it was real quick, and I just wanted to highlight it. It wasn't that long ago in New York where to have this many women city council members would have constituted pretty much the entire women's caucus. We were at like 10 or 11 at one point, and now we're at 31. It is not accidental that we're able to have this event right now, because we have 31 women in City Council. That's a majority. We happen to have a woman speaker and Speaker Adams. And so now we can actually feel like we can not only have these panels, which is the starting point, but we're here to really kickstart action. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And I just wanted to pause and make sure that everyone caught that. Gender parity really matters in government. So we'll dive into the next part of today's event. We've been talking about daycare. But daycare is only a part of the story, because once our young ones go to school, most school days end at 2 p.m., 3 p.m., and most working people, you work 9 to 5, 9 to 6. Dolly Parton didn't sing 9 to 2. It's not 9 to 2. It's 9 to 5. So there's a gap. There's a gap, but that's also an opportunity. And so that's what we're here to talk about, after school programming. So really quick, I will introduce our panelists, starting from my far right, Councilmember Shaun Abreu, who represents District 7 here in Manhattan, includes Columbia, right? Next, we have Councilmember Carmen De La Rosa, representing District 10 in Manhattan. Councilmember Gale Brewer, representing District 6 in Manhattan. Councilmember Althea Stevens, representing District 16 in the Bronx. And finally, to my immediate right, Julie Menin, Councilmember representing District 26 in Queens. Welcome, everyone. So we're going to dive in, and I'm going to start with Councilmember Brewer. If you would, please just give us the landscape in New York City right now in terms of after school, and what are the biggest issues impacting working families right now with respect to access and affordability for after-school programs?
Well, first, thank you, Madam U.S. Senator, I would say. That's what's more important. And Dean, and certainly Ester Fuchs. I would say that they're similar to childcare, low wages. Even though the Speaker and the Mayor talked recently about the 333, a little bit of an increase for nonprofits, it's still not enough, because the wages are so low, you don't actually get to a living wage for the lowest. So that is a big issue. I would say also, we've had many discussions about making sure that the public knows where the child care centers are. Julie Menin's bills will help. But I do not think there is, from the administration, any kind of public service campaign to say, this is where you can go to get support. I would also say that the cuts, when DYCD says we're going to cut on certain levels child care, even though hopefully the City Council will restore, that sends a bad message to the community saying, we don't care about you. And those cuts are devastating. And you know what? They were not necessary, because we had the revenue, and the City Council knew that in advance. So those cuts are devastating. I would also say that we have to come up with more professional development. PACE does a great job on others, but this, as you heard, same thing in childcare. We have the same issue with after school. We also need new strategies. We have talked about the pandemic, and we know about all the issues with trauma. But mental health support, we need more social workers, case workers, mental health, just like in the same other parts of our educational system. And we need to make sure that children with disabilities are taken care of. I know that Councilmember Stevens had a hearing in November last year talking about this issue, after school and children with disabilities. Something like 20% or more of the young people have IEPs in the school system, and they need support. I would also, there are lots of programs, the Beacon, the Cornerstone, Compass, CASA, Saturday Night Lights, Sony SYC. You can talk about all those, but there are also lots of private. The City Council pays for CASA, and all these other programs, though, the DYCD funds were cut during this ridiculous. We also now have, I'm a big hater of the smoke shops. They call me, I closed one called Zazawaza, so they call me the Zazawaza Queen. I would love to call. So anyway, believe it or not, that's the challenge to after school, because the kids are able to go there, and they're not cutting 21. Doesn't mean a damn thing to these smoke shops. And then we have the wonderful migrants. I'm a big supporter of the asylum seekers, but we need more support for them in terms of after school, as well as everything else. And I just want to say, finally, there's always this discussion, and others know more. After school should be fun, should be academic, should have the right hours. And all of that has to be worked out because some teachers want to teach and get per diem, some are too burned out to do so. All of that also feeds into what exactly is the best childcare. I also want to shout out the National League of Cities. I'm on the board, and they have a big center looking at these issues around the country. There are some, we have bills that Crystal Hudson has to say universal childcare, just like childcare universal after school should be something that we focus on. I can tell you in some cases, elementary schools don't have an after-school program.
Right.
It's outrageous. So these are some of the issues that I think answer your question.
Well, and let's talk a bit more about proposed solutions. So Councilmember Abreu, you and Councilmember Brewer are working on a bill that would mandate universal after-school programming in public schools starting in September 2024. So tell us more about that bill and how that would be transformative for working families.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. So this is a bill that we're working on with Councilmember Brewer and Hudson. It would establish universal after-school programming, and basically the Department of Education and Department of Youth and Development would be required to establish this program. I would be remiss to not talk about my own after-school experience in answering this question. I am a proud alum of Columbia University, Columbia College 2014, but let me tell you what made all this possible. It was the Double Discovery Center at Columbia, a program that serves underserved communities, underrepresented communities like Washington Heights and Upper Manhattan. And let me tell you, this experience for me changed my life. I was able to travel to Germany. I was able to go on college tours throughout the country. Obviously, I didn't go far, but subject-specific tutoring, SAT tutoring, counseling. My chief of staff was my guidance counselor at the Double Discovery Center. I've known her for 15 years. That experience is transformative for working families because when my mom is at work at Zabar's on the Upper West Side, when I was 8 or 9 years old, or 10 or 15 years old, I needed somewhere to be. And during the summers, I dormed right here at John Jay, right here at Columbia. Very transformative experience. I don't think that the bill that we're working on is a magic wand to establish after-school programs because there are logistical considerations that we must consider as well. For instance, we have all this infrastructure with schools. The mayor talks a lot about extended use. I think that's something that we need to tackle. When the school day ends, who's using our schools? This is existing infrastructure that our local nonprofits can use. However, we don't have enough resources at the council. The council has CASA money. This is money that we allocate to specific after-school programs. We're talking about like 60, I don't know what the number is, 80,000. We only get like 4 to 5 CASAs for 5 after-school programs. We may have like 20 schools in our district. So we're looking at a fourth of after-school program, maybe a fifth of after-school programming for all of our schools. So there needs to be a funding mandate associated with this bill that we're working on. And on top of the infrastructure like our schools, we also have to consider how we can create zoning incentives as well for developers who want to build housing. I know we're in a housing crisis, but as part of this housing crisis, in terms of our approach for development, we should be looking at ways to make sure that we have child care centers in a lot of these buildings and that we're developing the pipeline and support. I also have bills that would reduce the backlog in terms of background checks. Background checks, I'm telling you, the designated standard at the federal level is 45 days. The city takes well beyond the 45 days. And I have bills that would make it done on time. I have bills that, for instance, if you're a teacher and you're switching grades, you have to do a background check again. Good government should be efficient. And if you're switching grades, if you're switching, employers within a 5-year period, I have a bill that says you shouldn't have to take the background check again if you did it within that designated standard, which would not be in violation of federal law. And that, because the issue is, during the time that there's a background check, you're not allowed to be in the classroom. You're not allowed to service young people. So I think we need to make government better in that sense.
So I appreciate that comment. I'm very sensitive to that issue. Many years ago, I worked at the Department of Investigation, and I know a lot about the backgrounding process. The fingerprinting process is a complicated issue. So I appreciate that you're really focusing on a lot of these logistical details in terms of how do we implement this on a large scale? And we're glad that you came home to us too. So, but you mentioned resources. I want to turn to Councilmember Juan, who you announced, this question's for you, you announced in October 2023 that you had secured $205,000 in funding for an after-school program that included enriching arts programming as well as technological upgrades for PSIS 78Q. So that's amazing. Congratulations. Tell us more about that program and how that can serve as a model for other schools.
Yes, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It's so good to see you all. I want to give a special shout out to our colleague, Councilmember Menin, for bringing all of us here together, as well as the entire SEPA program, and of course, Senator Hillary Clinton, our amazing moderator, and my colleagues. You'll hear a lot from my colleague, Councilmember Althea Stevens, who chairs the Committee for Youth, and she's been doing an amazing job advocating to make sure that not only all human service providers get funding, but also for all of our youth programming that is at risk of cuts. As someone who grew up on public school free lunch, as well as free after school programming, I would not be able to sit here the same way that you just heard from Councilmember Abreu if it weren't for these social benefits from our government. My mom still works at a nail salon for many hours until late into the night, and my dad has worked odd jobs ever since I immigrated here from South Korea. For me, after-school programs weren't just a safe place to be after school when my parents couldn't pick me up, especially when I was underage and I couldn't just walk home by myself, but it was also a place where I knew that I was going to get dinner, where I knew if there was no after-school program or if there was no school, I didn't know what I was going to eat. So with that said, what you also have to understand is that, for me, I represent Western Queens. What a lot of people think about, oh, I think there's a echo. Okay. When people think about my district, I represent Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, and Astoria. And what a lot of people think about is from across the river where they see the Pepsi Cola sign and the high rises of the luxury towers that are across the river. And they think, oh, okay, Councilmember 1's district is very wealthy. Everyone is well-to-do there. They don't need Title I funding. They're fine. They don't need after-school programs. I'm sure they'll figure it out by themselves. But what people forget is that each neighborhood in my district, as many council districts, is not all created equal. I also represent Queensbridge houses, Ravenswood houses, Woodside houses, which is the largest development of public housing in the country. So there are people who are living below 200% of the poverty line who have nowhere to go after school. And we have a very high rate of gun violence as well and gang activity. And when we sit down with a lot of the youth, especially from our high school students, after they've been experiencing violence and they don't want to go home after school, even if it's after 7 o'clock, because there's someone waiting for them at the door with a job for them to do, whether they like it or not. And when we talk to those students, the number one ask we get is for after-school activities, especially workforce development, especially interest in technology and digital literacy. They want to be able to make programming like videos, and we're able to partner with Museum of Moving Image and other programs to make sure that there is STEM program, because in New York State, unfortunately out of 51 states, we're very behind. The fact that we don't have STEM programs across the city for all of the public high schools is shameful, because other Midwestern states are way ahead of us in that way. So for me, when I took office, I looked at non-Title I schools or non-community schools in my district, which I have more than 25 schools, and they said, hey, it's a really hard problem for us to solve when we don't get Title I funding or community funding, yet we have affordable housing students as well as public housing students who have nowhere to go and their parents simply cannot afford it. What do we do? So I did what I could within my jurisdiction and my power to fund this after-school program so that students from low income have a free after-school program, but it's not enough. I'm just a stopgap for many, many other students in schools that are on a wait list or have no option at all, because another problem that I'm seeing in my district is that private care providers, aftercare providers are refusing to take child care vouchers, even though they're supposed to. Or they're just refusing, and they're making it harder for these parents who have vouchers to have after-school care. And as our moderator has just said, our work doesn't end at 5. I mean, it doesn't even end at 2:30. Many people like my mom who work 2-3 jobs, they're working around the clock, or they're working evening shifts so that they can make rent. And we have a long way to go.
And I think, thank you for that. And I think I want to bring in Councilmember Stevens. So you mentioned just how kids rely on after school for so many different needs and resources, and we have to talk about the connection between after school programming and mental health. So you're the lead sponsor of a bill that would require the after-school programs known as Beacon Community Centers and Cornerstone Community Centers to provide mental health services. Tell us more about that bill and the importance of adding mental health programs to after-school programs.
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited about being here. And I see folks that I've known for a number of years here, so shout out to all of my friends in the audience who are providers and who've been doing the work and on the ground. I have the privilege of being a council member who was actually an after-school provider for over 20 years and worked for nonprofits and did this work and really fought to even be here around having people understanding. And so one thing for me that I always thought that was important is I really don't like the narrative that we spin that we need after school for parents and childcare. We need after school because it's an education enrichment. Studies shown that after school actually has increased grades, the young people's grades that are in after school. And what goes on in after school isn't babysitting. What we are doing is actually educational activities that supplement what they do during the day. And so I think some of it is like, we talk about it just being a place where people can go and be safe. That is a part of it, but it is also to ensure that young people are getting educational supplements and putting what they're learning in a day to actual real life experiences. And that's why a lot of times you're going on trips and you're doing real life experiences. When we talk about like STEM programs, they're able to like take deep dives. I remember when I had after school, we had robotics programs, we had all these things. And so, you know, for me, I think we also have to push that conversation that yes, it is childcare, but it also is an educational supplement. And when you go to wealthier school districts, that is a part of the curriculum. And so we have to make sure that we're pushing in that direction because yes, people need to have childcare and we're never gonna take that away, but young people actually need this in order for them to be successful because we know that they're not able to get everything that they need in the day program. And so for me, I think it's important to bring that piece into the conversation because I feel like it always gets left out. But also when you talk about the mental health capacity piece, so one of the things when you talk to providers, and because I've been in this work, we're already doing that. Most after-school programs are social services agencies anyway. And what's happening is they are figuring out how to get additional social workers to come in and to support families, do case management, and do all the things. This bill is about actually saying if we are developing contracts and RFPs around mental health, we should be paying for it because we know that this is necessary. And, you know, I think when we're even talking about building our after-school program and we're talking about universal after-school, we have to also talk about how are we also helping and supporting providers to build capacity because that also can't be left out of the conversation because like even with this bill, they're already kind of doing it, right? They're figuring it out, whether they're referring them to someone else in the agency or going to their agency partners and friends to refer them to these services. And so we have to think about how are we making sure that one, these providers are getting support around hiring. One of the things that we're not talking about, there has been a huge hiring shortage for folks because people are not going to this industry. I actually stumbled on youth development. This was not something that I thought. I didn't know that I can do something and work with kids and not be a teacher because I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. I don't like to have restrictions. But I went into, I don't. That's the truth. I don't like, but in after school, I was literally able to teach the young people what I deemed important. We were able to deep dive in things in a way that they weren't able to do in after school, right? And so when I think about how I did like community leader events, like I said, we taught robotics, we did a play. I remember we put on a number of plays, and those things wouldn't be able to happen during the day because there were things that they had to do and requirements. But a lot of people don't know that. And so how are we also building capacity around young people and creating pathways for people to see this as an actual career? And how are we making sure that we're also supporting and thinking about, you know, workforce development for young people because a lot of the group leaders are some of the younger folks who are in college or at high school. How are we making sure that there's pathways for them to get there? So I think that we also just have to think about what supports are we providing to providers in order to build these things out because there's so many missing pieces. I know Councilmember Abreu talked about DOH piece, right? If you talk to a provider, that is probably one of the biggest headaches in after school because the clearance process is daunting. However, sometimes we have to figure out, well, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and how do we make sure that, you know, they're able to get cleared in the right way because we don't want to take away the process, because we want to make sure people can work in these spaces, right? Like, I think we don't want an incident where we take away something and it's like, oh, we probably shouldn't have, and now someone got hurt or different things happen. So we have to make sure that we're looking at those infrastructures there. And we also have to look at funding. I've been a big champion of Just Pay, and yes, they did get the 3% COLA, and it was a really good deal, but we have to also think about what does pay parity look like? Because the other thing that we don't talk about is they're still the lowest paid employees in the city. And what happens is a lot of times city agencies steal employees. I've had commissioners say, nonprofit providers are some of our best training grounds. Because what happens is they go and they work here for years, get a lot of experience, and they can go make a lot more money somewhere else. And so we have to make sure we're thinking about pay parity, we're thinking about supporting providers, we're thinking about all these different things, because the providers are doing the work, and a lot of times they don't talk about the work that they're doing. But for me, it's always thinking about what does equity look like and how do we pay them for what they need to be doing.
Oh, there's so much in your answer. Thank you so much. I have to say, so I teach a class here called Women in Leadership. No, I mean, I'm gonna make them watch this answer and like unpack everything, because there was so much that you put on the table. I mean, I think what really is sticking out for me though is that resource question. And what you said was, this is the work that's happening anyway through these vehicles. We're not paying for it, so we're expecting a lot of free labor from the sector and not appropriately supporting this, and it's a scandal. So I feel like you're really addressing that piece, but so much more in your answers. So thank you. And I also really resonated with the fact that you're focusing on the opportunity that after-school programming can provide. Daycare, watching the children is important, and it is about work schedules, and it is about creating that flexibility for families, for sure. But within that, there's so much opportunity to deliver amazing enrichment, and so I love that you put that on the table as well, so thank you for highlighting that. We're going back to sort of this, so we're talking about mental health, but then we have to talk about COVID here in the city in particular. So Councilmember De La Rosa, we know that COVID caused a lot of our students to lose ground educationally, and particularly in communities like yours, communities like mine, communities like ours, right? So what kind of support should after-school programs be providing specifically to address this COVID learning gap? And then as a follow-up, how can our after-school providers get the resources that they need to be able to be successful in that endeavor?
Well, thank you for that question, and I want to thank SEPA for bringing us together with these amazing women across the room and the men who get it. We like to say that in the City Council for our colleagues. First of all, let me just say that the pandemic really should have been a learning moment for us, where we say we have to put it back together, the pieces of the puzzle, but we have to put it back together in a different way. Because in communities like mine, I represent Washington Heights, Inwood, and Marble Hill in Northern Manhattan. And so when you look at the maps that came out after COVID, and you look at the social determinants of health, people who are suffering with cancers, diabetes, cardiac issues, and you look and you overlay the map of where COVID deaths happen across our city, they're like this, they mirror each other. That is not a coincidence. That is because of the generations and the lack of investment in preventative medicine, in preventative care, in our ability to fund communities that are food deserts, in our ability to make sure that government is giving the benefits that are needed in these communities so that people can eat healthier, so that people can live healthier lives. When we look at our children and we think about what was happening to our children during the pandemic, I got on a Zoom during the pandemic with a group of young people in my district. And we were talking about mental health, we were talking about how they were feeling. And one of the students said to me, I feel like I can't be on the Zoom with my camera on. Because where I live in a one-bedroom apartment where I'm sharing a space where I'm supposed to be learning with 4 other siblings. And I don't want my classmates to see my apartment. So there was real shame, there was real a feeling of, I don't belong here, and I'm letting people into my living room to see the conditions under which I live. I wish that was a unique story in Northern Manhattan, but in communities like ours, I look at Councilmember Sanchez because we're neighbors, and Councilmember Abreu, we're neighbors. We have folks who are so burdened by the instability of housing in our city. And when you layer on top of that the need to be in the workforce, the need to make sure that parents are able to go to work and make a living, that is a real issue. Our after-school programs are, first of all, not all our schools have after-school program. Let's start there with a basic, not all our schools have after-school programs. When I visited schools post-pandemic, a lot of the principals in the school say to me, I don't have after-school program because I would have to take out of my budget in order to pay for an after-school provider to come in and actually do the after-school program. And then I can't do that because I need to make sure that if we are paying for teachers, I'm paying for teachers for science and math and cluster. And if there are special needs in the classroom or in the school, we need to make sure that those services are provided first. And so all of the money that's left over, that's what goes to after school. Just that mentality and that thinking, the fact that we're forcing our teachers and our administrators to think that way about after school shows us that this system is broken. Pair that with the drying up of federal stimulus, COVID stimulus funds. They're creating real gaps in school budgets. In my community, for example, school budgets are based on enrollment. Enrollment is low, the school budget is smaller. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where the school can't make up the enrollment because who wants to send their child to a school that is failing in terms of the metrics that we're using to grade our schools? So the schools remain under-enrolled, the COVID funding is dried up, and they have less money to do all of the work with. And so our colleagues have spoken about what the solutions are. The solution is, one, making sure that we're working with our state and federal partners to make sure that after school is not an afterthought, to make sure that when we're looking at school budgets, they have the money there to carry out these services. But it's also empowering our community-based organizations who are on the ground doing this work. I chair the Civil Service and Labor Committee, and I feel like this issue is a workforce issue. We've talked about pay parity. But when we look at our workforce as a city, our agencies right now in this administration, our city agencies are hollow. We have some of the highest vacancy rate in our city agencies in the history of our city. That is a symptom of the pandemic, but that's also a symptom of us as a city not being able to retain a workforce and agencies that are efficient. And so when a nonprofit is waiting for a contract to be signed off so that they can receive the funding, remember, our city funding is a reimbursement process. So the nonprofits already have to fund the money up front and then recoup it. If that's taking 14, 18 months, we are putting these nonprofits on a roll to bankruptcy.
That's right.
They cannot maintain the gaps that we're expecting for them to fill. And so I know that my colleague Julie Menin, who chairs the Contracts Committee, I know that my colleague Althea Stevens, who chairs the YCD, I know Gale Brewer, all of us, we're collectively working on making sure that government agencies are able to carry out this work so that our nonprofits can be those stopgaps in the after-school continuum. And it's a continuum of care, right? I have a 9-year-old. When I first ran for office, I served in the state legislature before I came. My daughter was 2. And I couldn't have done it without the child care help that I had. But also, now that she's 9 years old, the program closes at 5. So you'll catch me on the West Side Highway speeding from City Hall to get her at 5 o'clock. Why is it 5 o'clock and not 6:30? If you get out of work at 5 o'clock, who holds your child for that extra hour? I'm always late. I'm like, sorry guys, I'm the council member, I'm late. I'm coming from City Hall. But that is a gap that is unaddressed. And if we want our providers to be able to address those gaps, we have to arm them with the tools to be able to do that. And while doing that, also give our children, as our chair said, academic excellence as they serve our communities.
Thank you for that. That's a great segue actually to open up the floor to push a little bit more into the different types of policies that we could be advancing that support this goal. I mean, you touched on the contract issue and the reimbursement issue. Are there other policies that you would like to see advanced that will support your work around after school? And I'll just start from you, Councilmember Juan, and we'll go down the panel.
I believe Councilmember Brewer has already mentioned it. We have a bill right now from Councilmember Crystal Hudson for universal after-school care. And I know that there is a state version as well. And we want to see that happen because it is not okay that not all schools even have an after-school program as an option. And in addition to that, I want to see more CASA programming and other after-school enrichment programs expanded, and even summer programming. It should not be that in my district, we don't even have Summer Rising. So people are scrambling to apply for Councilmember Menin's district to go across the river and apply there. We have to make it more accessible, and it has to be equitable across the city, not in certain pockets of the city where there is higher amounts of wealth. In addition to that, as we talked about for all the contracting issues, to make sure that our nonprofits are funded and these private care providers are funded, also we have to think about the interest rate in which they are also paying upfront because of the delayed payments in the city. We are working very quick, as fast as possible with the Mayor's Office of Contracts as well as the Comptroller's Office and the City Council to make it so that it is easier and faster for them to get paid. But the processes and the state laws that we're under the jurisdiction by, we have to make sure that there's actual reform and look at ways that we're making sure that interest rates are also covered. And that within the schedule, for example, Councilmember Stevens passed a piece of legislation last year mandating that there is a scheduled time for when certain parts of the process within contracts have to be processed on time. Yet we still don't have a schedule because the process is so outdated, and we are now in the midst of modernization from a lot of paper-based processes to now a digital passport system and others. But even then, there is still a delay. There's still a lot of hiccups along the way, and there is no penalty for the agencies. If we, as a regular citizen, do not abide by the law, we get penalized. There is a fine, or you have to go do something. Yet for city agencies, when they don't abide by the law, there is no penalty or accountability, and that has to change. Even though they're fighting us tooth and nail, I think this year we have to make sure that there is some sort of accountability measure for these city agencies that are not paying on time and not doing their due process in a timely manner.
Thank you. Councilmember Stevens.
There's so much, so I'm gonna try to sum it up in just a couple. So I do work really closely with Councilmember Juan because she chairs contracting, and I have a number of bills around really trying to fix the contracting process and also thinking about how do we reform the procurement process in general, right? I say this all the time. It is inherently racist and how we are funding. We should not be having organizations upfront the money, because if you're a small organization and you are doing the good work, you do not have the capital. So you are already cutting a lot of the smaller organizations out of the equation to even apply for the contracts. And so for me, we need to start over and think about how does this work. I know the administration, they've been doing some really innovative things with MWBEs around upfronting some of the money up front and giving 30 days to get the balance of their money. I want to see how do we transfer that over to the nonprofit sector, because I think it is important. Because again, we have a lot of organizations who are doing really good work and who are on the ground and in the community, actually knows the community, but they cannot compete. Right. And it's just not okay. Also thinking about students with disabilities, this is a piece that we really don't talk about, right? And so a lot of times, after schools are taking young people with disabilities and have IEPs and all the things, but sometimes, especially, and I remember this specifically when I was in after school programs, there were sometimes kids that I could not serve. And it would break my heart because it was like, I would love for them to be here, but we just don't have the capacity. And I remember parents being like, well, do you have a program that you could recommend? And a lot of times I was like, I'm sorry, I don't. And so we have to also think about how there is equity amongst the different programs, and also given flexibility, because sometimes even the way the schedule is made, it does not leave for a lot of flexibility to be able to support the kids' needs. It's like, we have a formula, this is a formula, you know, you have to have 10 hours of recreation, you have to have 10 hours of STEM, like it's really scripted, and we need to make sure that we're giving providers the flexibility in order to meet the kids' needs, right? Also, just thinking about how do we make sure that one of the things I'm fighting for right now is middle school programming, because I don't know if folks remember when we had another mayor that was his whole champion around like building out universal middle school, and then he came in, it didn't really happen. And even now, I am seeing how middle school program is being gutted from the inside out. Like the thought around it is thinking like middle school program is being decreased so ridiculously, but I'm also seeing at the same time the numbers in juvenile justice systems for those same young people rising at a ridiculous rate. So I am the chair of Children and Youth Services, and not only do I oversee DYCD, I now have ACS in my portfolio. And so now I'm able to kind of see the whole totality of how we are missing out on this group of young students. And literally, we have seen our juvenile justice facilities are at 90% right now. They're building out one of our juvenile justice facilities because there are too many children there. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Why are we not talking about this? And so if we are seeing a decrease in the after-school program and after-school resources going to this group of kids at the same time, an increase in felony gun charges for young people between the ages of 15 and 18. We got to do something. And so for me, this is something that I'm ringing the alarm about, of saying, like, no, we need to really double down to say, how are we supporting these young people? How are we supporting their families? And how are we stopping them before they even get there? Because another thing I say is, well, where were they before they got here? Were they in an after-school program? Were they in the Beacon? Were they here? What programs? And how are we using those touch points to get and support our young people before they get into these situations? That, quite frankly, becomes a revolving door. So when we're talking about close Rikers Island and we're not talking about reducing the numbers at the juvenile justice systems, those things, it's not adding up. And so for me, it's thinking about how are we supporting that piece right there, because I feel like it's one of the things that we're kind of like missing at this moment.
I don't know, Professor.
I have so much more.
We may have some kind of, I feel like some kind of collaboration, some kind of research project, something. I don't know. Think about it.
I'm here, ready.
Councilmember Brewer.
Some of the same issues. Obviously, the low wage has to be addressed. Funding has to be addressed. But even some on the minutia issues like transportation. Many of the young people who are able to get into an after-school program because they have a disability, guess what? They can't because they don't have transportation. I'm head of oversight and investigations. We've been looking at the bus situation generally for children with disabilities, and it's a mess. Even if just to get to school in general, not to mention the migrant individuals who sometimes have to come from a long way. Almost impossible to get a bus. So transportation. Also, if you're in high school, you get a certain number of Metro card, but you don't get enough to also cover after school. So you end up having to do it for yourself. So the whole transportation issue has to be addressed. I would also say that we have to figure out what exactly it is that we want to have as part of universal. In other words, we want to make sure that what is the component of academics, what is the component of sports, and what are the facilities we need to do that. You know, there is a cost to the schools. People forget that understandably, the custodians need money and the schools need to run. I can't tell you how many times a nonprofit says, I cannot afford to be in that school weekends, evenings, summer, etc. That's crazy. As we heard earlier from Councilmember Abreu, the schools are empty often. For God's sake, that should be free for the nonprofit that's going to provide the after-school program. That's a constant problem. And I also want to talk about food. For young people, many times the after-school program is a place to eat. They do not like the school food. I could go on and on about the school food. But it needs to be a place also of nutrition. It needs to be a place where you feel that the snack that you are getting is something that you also want to participate in terms of nutrition. The after-school program can be the place that you get the opportunities that you don't get during school. Theater is a big one. CASA is important. We're the city of the arts, of culture. For God's sake, give money to the artists and those programs that are the basis of New York. Why do people come to New York City? They come for the arts. We should be able to have more arts funding that's already tight for artists. This public funding should go towards young people, because then you build the audiences for the future. Not only do they get to participate, but they become audience members for the future. So CASA is fine. We need a whole lot more of it. It obviously stands for making arts available. Mayor Dinkins was the one, as Ester Fuchs knows, who started the Beacon programs along with Richard Murphy, who was the youth commissioner at the time. And the Beacon programs are always being cut. They're constantly down in terms of their base funding. There are, I think, around 92 of them. There should be more because they're open to everybody, obviously middle school in particular. The middle school funding for Friday's been cut, I believe. That's ridiculous. Why would you cut Friday for middle school after school programs. So also to answer your question, bring back the money for entire middle school so they have that opportunity for constant after school.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes. Just to piggyback on everything my colleagues have said, I think that this, mind-blowing idea that I have been talking about is holding our schools harmless when it comes to these budget negotiations. This is something that is in all of our power. We are all part of the City Council. When we're seeing investments coming in from the state in order to fund foundation aid in our schools, we are seeing, even though there's federal dollars that are drying up, there are other fountains of resources that can come in from the federal government. It's really having across-the-board collaboration with our partners in government to ensure that our schools are held harmless during these budget cuts. If we really want our schools to be hubs of learning, from the moment you drop your child off to have breakfast in school, which is at 7:15 in the morning, a point for nutrition, to all the way 5 o'clock, which is the latest you can pick them up, in after school. We need to make sure that we're creating community hubs. What's happening on the weekend? What's happening after hours? In order to do any of that, we need to make sure that our schools are held harmless in these budget negotiations. And I know a lot of us have been focused on that. It's not an easy fight because we do know that there are challenges, but we know that if we prioritize it and there is political will, it can happen. And so I'm going to leave it with that optimistic point that we can make sure we hold schools harmless.
Thank you for that note of optimism, definitely. Last word.
My colleagues covered everything. But there's an area that I think also deserves equal attention, and for me it was a version of after school as well, is year-round youth employment, especially if you're of working age, of course. When I was 15 years old, was it 16 years old?
15.
It's 15. When I was 15 years old, I was working at the New York Public Library at Morningside on 113th Street, where I worked all throughout my 3 years of high school, from my sophomore year through my senior year. And it teaches you a lot about discipline, teaches you a lot about what life is about, and teaches you how to be responsible and civically engaged when you have to interact with the public. I think this is something that we ought to consider as well as part of the after-school framework. I know that we have done an incredible job for SYEP, Summer Youth Employment Programs, but I think year-round youth employment ought to be a huge priority for us too.
That's great. And we've
Can I just
covered
add something
a
to
lot
that?
of ground. Yes, real quick.
Because I think that is
10
important, and just thinking about, we need to reimagine what youth employment looks like. Because summer youth is a piece, but that was created in the 70s. And right now, if you're of a certain age, you could go to the grocery store and get an after-school job, the library, whatever. But at this point, our young people are competing with adults to get some of these part-time jobs. And so it's really hard, and a lot of places don't start until 18. So I'm going to say we need to reimagine what youth employment looks like in the city as a whole.
That's right.
That's great. And we've covered so much ground on this panel. And you know what I think what it really highlights for me is the fact that when you're talking about after-school care, the infrastructure, it's many, many issues that come into play. So I think we were really able to surface that with this panel. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. And that concludes this portion of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank all of our panelists again, but also everyone in the audience who literally is part of this important conversation because of what you do, or the work you're doing here at SEPA or other parts of Columbia. And I think there were a couple of shout outs between Jerry and Esther and the rest of us about the follow-up that we want to try to do to support what these extraordinary council members are focused on, trying to get through the council and then get implemented. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Esther, but I think some kind of mapping program about where we really are seeing what is already in place, and then trying to connect all these various programs, some that are already in existence but maybe not being as broad as they need to be, and others to fill gaps. So I would love to support that and be part of that through the work we do here at SEPA and IGP. But I think you've got to agree with me. Aren't we lucky to have these extraordinary people as members of the City Council of New York City?